Well now, they told me I ought to sit still while it turns. Said it catches a body's voice the way a jar catches summer peaches. I don't rightly know how a machine can keep a thing like that, but the young fellow there swears it does, so I'll trust him same as I trust a clock I never opened. If I speak too soft, you wave your hand, son. My hearing's gone thin, but my eyes still catch a signal. This is being done in the year 1935, just outside Louisville, Kentucky. Used to be nothing here but pasture and a dirt lane that turned to soup and spring. Now there's wires strung like spider silk and motor cars coughing up dust where mules once plodded. World's gone ahead in a hurry. A body like me mostly stayed where she was put. My name at birth was Sarah Louise Merritt. I came into this world on January the 21st, 1844, on a patch of winter stiff ground my father rented more than owned. House leaned a little east, as if it meant to walk off toward the river but never found the strength. We had 2 rooms, a stove that smoked when the wind sulked, and a well so cold in January it near took the skin off your hands. I was the second of 3 that lived. First lesson I learned was how to carry water without spilling. Second was how to mind my tongue when grown folks spoke low. That was the kind of place it was, nothing grand, but everything watched. Back then I thought a girl's life was like a road already rutted. You just followed the marks till they led you to somebody else's doorway. I followed mine sooner than most. At 14 years of age, I left the name Merritt behind and took the name Hayes. Didn't feel like stepping into a new life. Felt more like stepping out of the old one before I'd finished wearing it. Folks will tell you a wedding is the turning of a woman's road. They'll say that's when her story truly begins. But I learned different. My life did not change the day I married. It changed the day before it, though I didn't yet know the shape of it. There are things a girl believes belong to her alone, her thoughts, her fears, the small hopes she hides even from the Lord when she's unsure He'd approve. I had one such thing. Carried it quiet, the way women carry most of what matters. And before I'd seen 15 summers, I'd already been made to learn how little of a girl's life is hers to keep. I was born Sarah Louise Merritt, January 21st, 1844. And by the time I was 14, I already had a child the world told me to forget. I will tell how that came to pass. I will tell it plain, same as it was lived. Not for pity, and not for blame, only so the truth don't die when I do. You let that machine keep turning, son. I reckon it's time the whole of it was spoken. Well now, when I think back on those early years, I don't recollect riches, nor ease, nor any such comfort folks nowadays speak of, but I do remember warmth, not the kind from a stove alone, but the sort that comes from knowing where you belong when night falls. We lived out on Kentucky soil that gave only when coaxed and complained. Even then, spring meant mud to the knees and planting by hand. Summer meant long light and longer work. Come autumn, we prayed the corn held steady and the tobacco fetched enough to see us through. Winter was the hardest visitor, slipped in under the door and sat with us whether invited or not. Still, a body can be poor and not feel it, so long as the table holds 3 plates and laughter finds its way in now and then. My father was a quiet man, though not a cold one. He had a way of setting his hand on your shoulder instead of speaking, and somehow that told more than words could have managed. When he did talk, it was slow and certain, like he weighed every sentence before letting it out. He taught me how to split kindling straight and how to tell a coming storm by the smell of the air. Said a person ought to learn the language of the land, because the land rarely bothers to learn ours. On Sundays he'd wash up careful, comb his hair back with water from the basin, and walk us the 2 miles to meeting. Didn't miss near a single one unless fever or flood barred the road. He held faith the way some men hold tools, not for show, but because he meant to use it. My mother was a harder shape to read. She kept the house in a manner that left no room for waste or softness, floors scrubbed till the boards showed pale, jars lined straight as soldiers, and every scrap of cloth saved for some later use. She did not raise her voice often, but when she did, it came sharp enough to cut through whatever foolishness had taken root. As a child I did not think her unkind, only firm. She braided my hair tight so it wouldn't tangle in chores, mended my dresses till the fabric near forgot its first stitching, and saw to it I learned work before I learned dreaming. She'd say, "Dash the world, don't feed idle hands, Sarah." And I believed her. There were nights she'd sit by the lamp counting coins with her lips pressed thin, and I'd see in her face a kind of worry that never quite slept, not fear exactly, more like calculation, as if she were always measuring tomorrow against what little sat in her palm today. But she kept us clothed, kept us fed as best she could. And in those days, that counted for love. Our home breathed religion the way a body breathes air. Morning grace, evening prayer, scripture read when weather trapped us indoors, the Bible sat on the table heavier than any other book, and its words were treated like they might hear us speaking back. I learned early that God watched everything, not with cruelty, but with an accounting eye, that a soul's worth lay in obedience, in humility, in bearing what was handed to you without too much complaint. It did not feel like a burden then. It felt like order. Like the world made sense if you followed the rules written in that thick, worn book. When I lay down at night beside the small window, I'd hear the crickets working their fiddles and my parents' voices low in the next room. I thought that sound meant safety, thought that so long as those voices carried through the wall, nothing truly bad could find us. A child measures the world by the steadiness of her parents. And mine, at the time, seemed steady as fence posts sunk deep. But life has a way of shifting the ground without asking first. A family can look the same from the road and yet be changing inside, board by board. I did not see it then. No child ever does. Trouble does not ride up loud. Sometimes it walks in quiet, wearing your own mother's face. I reckon the first crack in my life come the winter my father took ill. It started with a cough that wouldn't quit him. At first he brushed it off same as any man raised to believe rest was near a sin, kept working the fields, kept splitting wood, though each swing of the axe seemed to pull something out of him besides breath. By January he was moving slower, by February he was sitting more than standing, and come March he was laid up in the back room with the window propped, though the cold still slipped in round the frame. I remember the sound of his coughing in the night, deep, tearing, like his chest was trying to give up something it couldn't spare. My mother stopped sleeping proper, stopped humming at her work, stopped looking at the horizon the way she used to, like it might bring better days. Men from church came by, hats in their hands, voices low. I caught bits of talk of doctor's fees, borrowed grain, notes unpaid, words I didn't rightly understand yet, though I felt their weight settle in the house like damp. Father passed before the thaw came full, quiet, the way he'd lived, one hand on the quilt, the other in my mother's grip. I remember thinking the world ought to stop a spell when a man like him left it. But it don't. It just keeps turning, same as ever, only colder for those left behind. After the burying, the talk changed. It weren't about prayers no more, it was about numbers. My mother took to meeting men at the table with papers spread before her. She listened hard, spoke little, and signed what needed signing. I saw a look come over her in those weeks, not grief alone, but something sharper, calculation again, only now it had teeth. One evening she called me, and while the sun was dropping red behind the trees, she didn't sit me down gentle, didn't ease into the matter. She said, Sarah, a girl alone in this world must be anchored. We can't keep this place without help. I told her I'd work harder, said I'd take on extra sewing, extra chores, whatever she asked. I was 14 and still thought effort could mend anything. She shook her head once. It ain't work we need, she said. It's security. That was the first time I heard the name Hayes spoken in our house. He was a widower from a few miles off, owned land enough to count for something, stock enough to keep it turning, and years enough on him to be my father's equal had father lived. I knew him only by sight, a broad man, slow in speech, eyes that seemed always measuring what stood before him. I laughed when she first said it, thought she meant to hire on with him, or take in washing, or some such arrangement grown folks made. But she didn't laugh. She said plain, you'll marry him come spring. I remember the way the room sounded after that, not silence exactly, more like all the small noises of the house got suddenly loud, the clock ticking, the stove settling, my own breath going quick as if I'd run a mile. I told her I weren't ready, told her I still had schooling to finish, chores here, a life not yet begun. She answered, your life begins where it must keep you fed. I asked if there weren't another way. She said there weren't. I asked if father would have wanted it. She said father was gone and debts were not. That settled it in her mind, though it didn't in mine. Spring came fast that year, same as it always does when you dread what follows it. My wedding day smelled of damp earth and lilac, folks gathered, hands shaken, words spoken that I heard as if from down a long tunnel. Someone fixed flowers in my hair, someone else tightened the laces of a dress I'd never chosen. When the preacher asked my name, I gave the one I'd always had. When the vows were done, he spoke another. Sarah Louise Merritt left that church. Sarah Hayes stepped out in her place. I remember signing the paper, my hand trembling so the letters leaned like they were trying to escape the line. People smiled, said I was fortunate, said a girl with a roof promised over her head ought to thank the Lord. I tried to feel thankful, tried to feel grown. But what I mostly felt was small. That night, sitting on the edge of a bed in a house that smelled strange and new, I looked down at my hands and realized something quiet but certain. My childhood had ended not by years, nor by choice, but by bargain. And the names stitched into my life from that day forward weren't one I'd stepped into. It was one handed to me. That day I did not feel wed. I felt traded. It weren't long after I stepped into that new house as Sarah Hayes before I felt the stirrings of life I didn't rightly understand at first. I was just 14, mind you, and yet there it was, a quickening in my belly that made me pause mid-chore, made my hands tremble over the dishes, made me press my apron tight as if it could hold this secret safe. I hadn't known the first thing about carrying a child. In the fields back home, I'd seen cows calf and hens hatch, but never thought it could feel so different, so urgent, so wholly mine. Each flutter, each shift inside me whispered of a tiny life that I alone had a part in. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. I would sit by the window after the chores were done, when the kitchen was quiet and the sun dropped low over the Kentucky hills, and I'd talk to that child in whispers. "I don't rightly know how to care for you," I'd say, voice catching, "but I swear I'll try." Sometimes my tears fell heavy on the windowsill, and I prayed the Lord would hear a girl who scarcely knew her own way. Evenings were hardest. My mother went about her business, mind on debts and ledgers, and my husband, well, he was patient enough, but not gentle. I didn't expect gentleness. I expected shelter, and in that I was grateful. But nothing could shield me from the swell of feeling that this little one inside me was something beyond the bartered life I'd been handed. I imagined the child's eyes. Would they be bright as mine? Dark as my father's? Would they laugh with a sound that could fill a room? Or would they be quiet like the shadows that crept through our house in the evenings? I couldn't know, but I hoped with every beat of my heart that this child would have something I had been denied, a chance to feel love before the world told them otherwise. And I thought of my mother sometimes, the woman who had traded me like coin. I didn't dare speak these thoughts aloud, but in the hush of night, I prayed for protection over this little soul, not forgiveness, not yet, just safe hands and a strong spirit to meet the trials the world would surely hand them. In the mornings, I would rise before the sun, wrap my apron, and let my fingers linger over my belly as I worked. I whispered promises between the beats of the chores. "I'll make this world better for you. I'll keep you fed, keep you clothed, and if the Lord allows, I'll fill your days with love." Even in the staleness of that small house, in the shadow of the debts and obligations that weighed heavy on us all, there was something growing brighter than I'd felt in years, a hope that stretched beyond the walls, beyond my mother's judgment, beyond the name I had been forced to carry. I sang to that child softly some nights, songs my father had hummed before he passed, tunes of fields and rivers and simple joy. Sometimes my husband would stand near the door, watch quiet as the melodies floated, and I felt a small, fleeting comfort that maybe he too understood that this life was something sacred, something to guard. I didn't know the shape of what lay ahead, only the thrum of life against life, and it was enough to make me believe a little in miracles. For the first time since my father died, I felt the Lord had left me something of my own. The spring sun had barely kissed the hills before the worry came back like a stubborn chill. Even with the child stirring within me, I could feel it press against my ribs. The weight of debts my mother had carried like a hidden stone in her apron pocket, it weren't gone. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how I scrubbed the floors or milked the cows or tended the garden, the ledgers on the table were always open, ink fading, numbers pressing down on our heads like a cloud you could neither touch nor push away. Some mornings, I'd hear the soft shuffle of boots outside, hear the low murmur of voices I couldn't quite place, creditors, I guessed, talking in whispers while my mother watched from the porch, hand gripping the railing. I would freeze mid-step, knowing those whispers weren't meant for me, but still I caught fragments. Must settle soon, no more time, girl's portion, and then silence. My heart would hammer, a little harder each time, and I felt a cold prickle along my spine, as if trouble itself was tiptoeing through the kitchen. My husband tried to keep busy, fumbling with fences or hauling firewood, but I saw it plain in his eyes. He was no man to confront the world's hard edges. He'd glance at me from across the yard, and I could read his worry, but it were shallow worry. The kind that didn't reach his hands. He could not lift this weight, could not carry it off my mother's shoulders or mine, and so it fell heavier still, the quiet dread that had begun to grow in the corner of my heart. I took to pacing the barn, letting my fingers brush over the warm hay, trying to soothe the fluttering in my belly with simple tasks, yet every step brought the worry closer. I heard my mother's voice in the evenings, calm and deliberate, talking to some neighbor or creditor in the yard. I did not hear her raise her voice, did not hear her shout. It was soft, a velvet authority, but the words, they cut me deeper than any scolding I'd ever known. She spoke of selling, of settling, of making things right, as though I were a ledger entry, a name to be moved across a page, and I could not bear it. Nights were worse. The candle flickered low on the table while the child moved, small and insistent, and I could feel my own body tremble with what was coming. I whispered prayers, asking the Lord to guard what was mine, to keep my child safe, to give me strength to endure whatever my mother chose. But even as I whispered, I could feel the cold certainty settling over me. Something beyond my control was being set into motion. I saw her walking across the yard, talking low with men whose eyes were sharp and whose boots carried the gravel of authority. My husband was there too, hands in pockets, unsure where to stand. I watched the tilt of my mother's chin, the way her shoulders squared just so, and in that moment I understood something terrible. The decision I feared was not mine to sway. I felt the walls close in. The very air seemed heavy with unspoken bargains. I pressed my hand to my belly, my fingers shaking, and I could feel the small life within me, quick and innocent, unaware of the commerce it had been pulled into before it even drew breath. I thought of the freedom I had dreamed for this child, the safety I had prayed for, and I felt a sharp, unbearable ache, the first deep, cutting sense of betrayal. I tried to speak to my mother, tried to catch her eye as she walked past, but her glance skimmed mine like a stone across water, smooth, unyielding, unbroken. She did not waver, she did not pause, and in her voice I heard no hesitation, only the faint tremor of necessity, of a debt that must be settled at any cost. The hours dragged on slow as molasses. My limbs ached from the work I continued only to distract myself, yet even in the motion, my mind circled the same fear, the same dread. What would become of my child? And could anything I'd done matter against the weight of my mother's decision? By mid-afternoon, I heard voices again, low and precise, moving across the yard. I slipped behind the barn door, pressed my cheek to the cool wood, straining to hear. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. The words were clipped, polite, but each one landed heavy. As agreed, takes effect tomorrow, no further delays. And then, clearer than any whisper I had ever feared, I heard her mother's voice carry over the fence, soft, deliberate, unyielding. It will be done, there's no other way. I froze, breath caught in my throat, and I knew, before anyone told me, that something had been sold. The morning air was sharp and still, like it knew what was coming before we did. I held the baby close, swaddled tight in the blanket I'd stitched through long, anxious nights, and I could feel him stir, small fists pressing against my chest. He smelled of warm milk and hope, and my chest ached in a way I'd never known before. The neighbors came quiet, as though they, too, feared what was to happen. Their wagons stood at the edge of the yard, wheels still, harnesses twitching, and I could see the faint crease of expectation in their brows. My mother walked with them, shoulders straight, eyes forward, saying nothing more than what was necessary, no tears, no protestations, no voice to shake the stillness. I followed them to the wagon, each step heavy, like I were dragging the weight of the earth behind me. My heart thumped in my chest, a frantic bird trapped behind ribs. The child kicked lightly, and I felt it as a plea, though of course he could not know the danger. I whispered to him softly, words my voice shook to carry. "It's all right, little one, you'll be safe. I'll watch over you in my prayers." My mother's face was a mask, carefully made of duty and resolve. I could not read it for softness or remorse, only the cool edge of necessity, the quiet strength of someone who believes there is no choice, no alternative, only the path that must be taken. I wanted to curse her, to scream, to shake her until she remembered the child she bore me, but the words lodged in my throat, they would not come. She lifted the infant gently from my arms, and I felt my body convulse. Though I made no sound, I felt as if the world itself had slipped from beneath me, and still, the wagon's wheels were silent against the hard earth. He looked up at me with wide eyes, too young to understand, too pure to fear, and I wanted to fold the moment back into my own body, to shield him forever from the world's hard edges. I prayed then, a prayer that came not from habit but from desperation. "Lord, protect him, keep him from harm. Keep him from the coldness I see in men's hearts." I did not ask for forgiveness for my mother. I could not. There was no room in my chest for mercy, only the sharp, raw ache of loss. The neighbors murmured, polite and careful, taking him as though he were a parcel rather than a child, and I had to look away. My knees felt weak, as if they had forgotten how to bear weight, and I leaned against the wagon, hands pressed to the rough wood, hearing the quiet shuffle of boots and the faint rattle of blankets. My mother stepped back, hands folded before her, face as calm as stone, and for a long moment I could not breathe. The air seemed thick, heavy with unspoken words and the absence of the warmth I had known in his small body pressed to mine. I wanted to reach for him, to take him back, but the moment had slipped past, silent as a shadow over the yard. I remembered how I had felt the first time I knew life stirred within me, the tiny quickness beneath my fingers, and the prayers I whispered then, for safety, for hope, for a future where love might bloom despite the world's cruelties. Now, standing with the infant lifted from my arms, I understood the sharp truth of those prayers. Life and hope could still exist, even when the world seemed cruel, but I was powerless to shape it. The wagon jolted as the neighbors settled the child inside, adjusting blankets, smoothing his hair, whispering quiet reassurances he would not yet understand. My mother nodded, brief, concise, a hand to her chin, and then she stepped back, leaving me to the stillness of the yard. The wind stirred the grass lightly, the only sound in the vast, cold morning. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. My throat was raw with the effort to hold something inside, some fragment of dignity or strength, though it felt as though the very marrow had been taken from me. I felt the child's warmth vanish with each foot the wagon moved, and the ache settled deep, a permanent hollow I could not mend. I prayed again, not for myself, not for mercy, but for him. Keep him safe, keep him loved, keep him away from harm I cannot shield him from. The words were my only offering, the only act left in a world that had taken so much from me before I even learned to walk in it. And as the wagon rolled away, quiet and deliberate, I stood rooted to the ground. My mother turned back once, a single glance, brief and unyielding. I saw no regret in it, only the weight of choices made long before, the kind a girl of 14 cannot fight. My chest tightened with grief, with love, with the unbearable truth that life had carved a space between us all, and I could not bridge it. I did not call out. I did not move. I could only watch, heart clutched by invisible hands. As my child was taken to a life I could not follow, I prayed he would protect my child. I did not ask for forgiveness for my mother. I could not. And in the quiet that followed, the yard empty and still, I felt a grief that would not leave me, a weight that would never lift. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in from all sides and makes a body feel its own smallness. I went about my work each day as though the morning itself were a prayer, washing, sweeping, cooking for the little family I still had around me. My hands were never idle, and neither was my heart, though it carried a weight no one could see. I planted vegetables and tended the animals, letting the rhythm of chores fill the empty spaces where grief tried to grow. I had other children, and they came one after another, little souls I could hold and love, but always with the ache tucked under my ribs. I gave them my name, my care, my prayers. I sang softly to them at night, stories of the fields, of the sky, of things too gentle to belong to the world I'd known. But I never spoke of the first, never let a word slip about the child I had lost, not to friends, not to family, not to strangers passing through the door. It was a wound folded inward, and I kept it there because speaking it aloud would tear the house down around me. Each day, I learned to put one foot before the other, to rise from the chair and gather eggs, to churn butter and mend clothes. People saw the work, the hands roughened by toil, the straight back and careful movements. They did not see the silent prayers, the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, whispering the child's name into the darkness. I found ways to survive that had nothing to do with joy. I stitched, I cooked, I washed, I walked the fields, letting the earth bear witness to my mourning. Sometimes the ache pressed so hard I thought it would crush me, and still I moved. The world demanded it, and I obeyed, quietly, without complaint. Even as years passed, even as children grew and life brought new worries, new work, the hollow space inside me remained. I carried it like a stone in my chest, heavy and unyielding, and I learned to balance it alongside the life I had to keep living. I learned to speak kindly to others, to smile when it was needed, and to hide the storm that raged behind my eyes. People asked how I managed, and I gave answers about chores and care, about keeping busy. They did not know the quiet strength it took to rise each day, to fill the house with life while mourning a part of my soul I would never reclaim. They did not know that love and grief can live together, one quietly sustaining the other, without a sound. And so I grew, not in ease or joy, but in endurance. I learned the limits of a woman's patience, the depth of her capacity to bear, to hold, to carry on when the heart feels broken beyond mending. Life continued, stubborn and unyielding, and I moved with it, step by step, letting the sun rise and set while keeping my secret tucked close. I learned to make a home, to nurture children, to meet the world's demands, all the while keeping a space inside me untouched, sacred, and silent. It was a lonely skill, but it kept me alive. Pain became a companion I did not welcome but could not dismiss. It shaped me, tempered me, taught me that a life can go on even when a part of you does not. And in that quiet, steadfast survival, I found a terrible kind of strength. I learned to bend without breaking, to walk with a weight that would have felled a weaker soul, and to keep giving even when my own heart had stopped a little inside. I learned that a woman may keep breathing long after something inside her has stopped. 70 years have walked past me now, and the world has grown into shapes I could scarce imagine as a girl. Roads stretched like ribbons of iron and stone where once the only paths were dirt and dust, winding between the hills and fields of Kentucky I knew so well. Towns have grown tall, their chimneys spitting smoke where once we saw only sky and the occasional wandering hawk. Machines rattle and hum, and strangers move faster than a horse could ever carry them. The air smells different, a mix of coal and steam and oil, and yet beneath it all, The land remembers the hands that worked it, the sweat that fed it, the prayers whispered into the soil. Time has a curious way of both healing and sharpening. I feel older than the years, and yet younger in ways I never dared hope. Memories rise like smoke in the evenings, soft, curling, sometimes choking me with their persistence. I remember the child I lost, the faces of my own little ones, the kindnesses and cruelties of those who shared my life. I remember my mother, her decisions, her voice, the quiet that fell over the house when the world seemed too loud for us to bear. And I remember myself, 14 years old, traded like a piece of cloth, yet still breathing, still learning what it means to endure. I have wondered, often, about the Lord and His designs. I prayed for my children, for my child, for myself. I prayed for forgiveness, and I prayed for understanding. Some days, I felt Him close, guiding me through the chores and the sorrow, warming me in the chill of loss. Other days, I felt abandoned, left to the cold truth that the world does not always answer with justice or mercy. Yet I have kept faith in the quietest way, through work, through care, through the steady pulse of a life lived, even when grief gnaws at its edges. I have watched the land change, and I have watched people change. Faces come and go, cities rise and fall. The wind carries voices of the new generation that I cannot always understand. And still, in the silence of my own heart, the first sorrow I carried whispers to me, reminding me that some things do not fade. Some things, no matter how long we live or how far we wander, remain etched in the marrow of our being. I have learned that life bends and twists like the rivers, that faith may waver but need not break, and that regret is a companion one carries quietly, never spoken aloud, yet never entirely forgotten. I have learned that we walk forward in time, but memory holds us in place, keeps us tethered to what was, and what will never be undone. And so I sit and watch the world go on, marveling at the marvels, mourning the losses, praying for understanding I cannot claim. I have lived through decades that were once unthinkable, and yet the ache of that first loss remains, a testament to the depth of a mother's heart and the persistence of the human soul. I do not know whether heaven remembers what earth forgets. Even as my own children grew, toddling about the yard and filling the house with laughter and mischief, I carried a shadow they could never see, the story of the child I had borne and lost. That quiet, cold exchange that left a piece of me empty remained locked inside. Behind lips that would not part, eyes that would not betray, I did not speak of it, not once, not in whispers, not in the quiet moments when the house grew still and the wind pressed against the windows like a question I could not answer. I feared their judgment. I feared the way their young hearts might twist in sorrow or anger if they knew that their mother, strong as she seemed, had once been powerless to protect the very life she carried. I feared that the world they were growing into, so bright, so eager, so full of hope, might crumble under the weight of truths too heavy for them to bear. And so I said nothing. I nodded at their joys, praised their triumphs, scolded their small misdeeds, but the deepest wound of my own life, the one that carved a hollow beneath my ribs, I kept hidden. Some nights, I would lie awake by the soft breathing of my children, hands resting on the curves of their sleeping forms, and I would imagine the child I had lost. I would see a small hand, white and trusting, reaching for mine, and I would whisper prayers into the darkness, asking for protection and peace that I could not give. My heart ached, as it always had, but I knew that speaking the truth would not bring that child back. It would only spread sorrow to those I loved most, and so, silence became my shield. Silence became the companion of my grief, and over the years it grew thick, a barrier between the life I had lived and the lives I nurtured. I watched my children grow, walked beside them through scraped knees and first heartbreaks, through school lessons and church gatherings. I guided them, I scolded them, I loved them fiercely, always aware that the secret I carried was a weight I could not lay down, a burden I would never pass to them. The faces of my little ones, now grown, carried laughter, determination, and the echo of innocence I had once known. I would not tarnish that light with the shadow of my lost child. In the quiet hours of my old age, when my hands trembled and my eyes dimmed with years, the truth remained in me, sealed with memory and prayer. I spoke of hardships, of loss, of the small deaths that life had given me, but never of that child I could not reclaim. It was a wound too deep, a sorrow too pure in its grief, and I knew that some truths are kept not to deceive, but to protect those we love from the harshness of the world. And so I carried the secret through all the seasons of my life, through laughter and tears, through the warmth of family and the quiet nights alone. I buried one child in silence and raised the others in love. I have lived many years since that day, and I have learned that life does not wait for our understanding. I bore children after him, little ones who grew into their own skin, who laughed and cried, who tested my patience and filled my heart with a love I never thought I could feel again. I held them close, whispered prayers over their heads, and watched them grow with the cautious joy of a mother who knew how cruel the world could be. Yet I never forgot the first, that small hand, that quiet face, the weight of his absence. It remained with me in every shadowed corner, every hushed evening, every moment when the house was still and the world felt too large to bear alone. I prayed for his safety, not for her pardon. My mother, I never forgave her, not truly. There were times I tried to understand, to see the choices she had made under the pressure of debt and society and fear, but understanding did not bring him back, and it did not ease the ache that settled in my chest like a stone I could never lift. I cannot say whether my life was right or wrong. I loved those I raised. I fed them, clothed them, held them through their small pains and triumphs. I gave them my heart, but the first child, the one taken from me quietly, without warning, remained a silent testament to the cost of obedience, of poverty, of decisions made in desperation. There is no comfort in knowing you did what you could not help but do, and there is no solace in praying for the living while the dead remain unclaimed in your heart. I speak to you now, not as a cautionary tale, but as a woman who lived through what no parent should. I lived, I loved, I endured, and I kept the memory of what was taken. Some wounds we carry to the grave, not because we cherish them, but because they are all that remains of what was taken. Tell me, if your own mother sold your child to pay a debt, if she turned the world's demand into a quiet transaction of your flesh and blood, what would you have done? Would you have bowed to the weight of survival, or would you have screamed into the night for a justice that would never come? Would you have found the strength to love again, even as your heart ached for the one you lost? I bore children after him, yet I never forgot the first. I prayed for his safety, not for her pardon. Some wounds we carry to the grave, not because we cherish them, but because they are all that remains of what was taken. Tell me, if your own mother sold your child to pay a debt, what would you have done?